People of Reddit who have been abducted by aliens. What's your story? Sadly, I live in Europe, they only visit USA. Not me, but heard this story from a friend about this fella who saw a bright light in the sky and stood there, staring at it. The bright light came closer and closer and it was a UFO. He looked at it and it just disappeared. Thinks that's weird, then gets in his car. As he's driving, he looks in the mirror and he's suddenly got a beard. Got out of the car to look at never mind the beard. Where have? He gets home and his girlfriend is looking at him a bit funny. He says to her, "Bright light, and when I got back in the car I had grown a beard." She says, quote, "You been for 3 days." Quote, "I used to think aliens were trying to abduct me. Terrified for years. Watched a documentary on sleep paralysis. And realized that was what was really happening to me. From that point on, when I had sleep paralysis, I knew what was happening and wasn't as terrified. Plus my husband started noticing the signs and would quickly pull me out of it. I was abducted outside my cousin's wedding reception. It's all very hazy. There were 2 of them and they caddied these powerful hand torches. They kept shining in my face. They could speak a rudimentary form of English. They kept asking questions about how much I had been drinking. I presume because Earth is a water planet. They had questions about what we drank. Contrary to popular belief about anal probes. One of the aliens kept trying to make me put my pants on. Not take them off. But I couldn't find my pants just then. The other alien, who seemed to be in charge, kept talking about disturbing the other wedding guests, and he tried to abduct my champagne bottle. Their spacecraft had a lot of bright lights on it, mostly red and blue. They took me to their mothership and put me in a holding area with some other humans they had also abducted that day. The next thing I know, it was morning and I was standing on the pavement downtown outside the police station. I was very fuzzy-headed, but physically unharmed. The whole experience gave me a terrible headache. Then I threw up on the bus. My brother-in-law says he was abducted. Don't know too much except he was out in the woods walking around. He was gone overnight. He never does that without letting somebody know that at least he's leaving. He was found the next morning completely stunned. On shack. He could barely talk. He never really said what happened. He won't talk about it. He said only that they performed examinations on him. His right foot now has what I can only describe as a birthmark on his right foot. It wasn't there before. That I know. It wasn't thorough. Now he's got a deep purple mark that covers most of his foot. WTF? They just wanted someone to explain the rules of American football. But I've never watched it and they got pissed at me for wasting their time. After the standard issue butt stuff they beamed me back, but it took like 3 hours to walk home. I have no story. No memory of it. Had an Emery and doc asked when I had back surgery. I've never had a single surgery in my life. He, Harvard grad and neurosurgeon, said, I definitely have had some kind of surgery given the scar tissue along my spine. I told him that's where the probe went when I got abducted. He became oddly more serious and wasn't indicating that I was joking at all. He looked at the film a bit longer and seemed to study them deeper this time and then said, I'd bet my education that you have scar tissue from surgery. So, no real story. Still have the scars as per my last Emery. They took me in the middle of the night. I was out feeding the cattle under the moonlight and then a big light came over me. Next thing I knew, I was driving down the road talking to what I later realized was my father. Or the person whose body I am now in's father. He made a joke about the time being slow and he had seen an episode of X-Files that mentioned that time reverses when aliens abduct so they can drop you off at the same time as they picked you up. Except I think they mixed something up because I am not in the same body left in I still remember my whole life before, but I am 18 years younger in this body, so I don't really mind. But a few years after the incident, I went to see if the farm I once lived on was still there. But it took me a while to get there without suspicion. It's gone. Like it never stood. Maybe it was all just a dream. I'm incredibly peeved that I can't find a reference for this now. But I read something that shifted my perspective on alien abduction memories. Essentially, the author posited that these are memories from early infancy that burble up and get reconstructed. A bright light being lifted up, loading. Distorted human-like faces with prominent eyes. Something happening to your genitalia and anus. That's a baby getting a diaper change. Overnight. Somewhere in our brains those memories are stored in a form that way predates our cognitive abilities, verbal processing. So we have these wisps of feelings and images. In that sense, an abduction experience is absolutely true. I can't remember the explanation for why the memories come back out later. But overall, this concept really stuck with me because it makes sense. Okay, I never was abducted, but I had this extremely realistic dream probably about 6 to 8 years ago now. Can't remember exactly when, but I still remember vividly. I had gotten in bed and I didn't even remember falling asleep. Next then I knew it felt like I was moving or being carried away by something, but it didn't feel scary. It actually felt quite peaceful and I couldn't find it. Nor did I care to. I end up laying on this cold slate, naked, in a bright room. Like everything was really light gray vitae and there was a bright light corning from the other end of the room. It seemed like there was some kind of equipment or something behind me, but I couldn't turn my head to see. I felt very sleepy and out of it. Standing over me was about 3 to 4 silhouettes that were alien-like. Definitely not people. They kind of looked like people but were more lengthy. And they brought out this big probe and probed me because they wanted to make a human-alien hybrid baby to see how it would live. Felt like only a few hours went by and they had gotten their alien baby from me and I was sent back down. I woke up. Weirdest dream ever lol. I wonder how my little star seed alien baby is doing. Hope they are thriving. It was around 3:50 a.m. I'm a night person, so I usually sleep around that time. It was starting to rain outside and there was a loud constant gust of wind blowing through the cracks near my window. It was eerie and I had a weird feeling that something bad was going to happen. I looked out the window and noticed nothing amiss, except that the trees were swaying pretty violently and that one of the trees got uprooted. I turned back and saw BWO aliens by my door. They looked haggard and their backs were bent. They also did not have any limbs. And their heads moved mechanically as though they were automatons. I noticed that the door was closed. So I presume they had just walked through or teleported straight into my room. They were talking in some strange language that seemed to be half Hernan and half alien, and the next thing I knew, I was being tied up in some giant opaque plastic bag. There were holes so I could breathe. Somehow I fell into a deep and peaceful trance. When I woke up I was in this foreign space. I could see through the holes in the plastic bag. It was as if I was in the sky and everything was floating. Then I heard footsteps. The ringleader, I presumed, came to inspect me. He unzipped the bag and the moment he saw my face, he lets out an audible "ew" and immediately zipped me back up. The next thing I knew I was back in my bed. If talk I will be in trouble. Corning back from ice fishing. The last day of the year to have ice houses on the lake. My father, sister, and I were in his truck and his friend was towing the ice house. We were coming around the corner and his friend was a little way back. I remember watching his headlights disappear around corner in the passenger mirror. A few seconds later I looked at the little air intake a lot of vehicles in the late 80s early 90s had. You could pull a lever and get some fresh airflow. I looked at that and thought everything was glowing. Like I could see all the melting snow on the floor and all around the floor where my feet were. I thought it was crazy bizarre, so I looked up to my father to tell him, and he was looking straight forward, white knuckling the steering wheel, and all around the vehicle there was a white light. Not really blinding bright, but like all the windows were frosted and it was daylight out. I kind of shouted, maybe more concerned than anything. Dad? Too. Quote, I said this a few times and then the light disappeared and we were stopped just around the corner where his friend's headlights disappeared. He looked to he shocked and said, I think we lost Ron. Let's turn around here and see what happened. We turned around at a field approach right after the corner and drove 5 minutes back to the lake. And his friend wasn't there. Then we drove home and his friend was there. The ice house was already backed into the spot next to our garage and his friend seemed worried. The ice house was big and hard to back into the little spot with just one person, and Ron was already had it in place jacked up on blocks. He said he was coming to look for us since we were almost an hour late. Traveling back to the lake to look for his friend was only a 10-minute drive round trip. Pretty sure we all got abducted that night. I was camping, they looked a lot like Sasquatches, and they smoked all my weed. They gave me chicken nuggets and McDonald's Sprite.